Professor Vex-9 clicked his mandibles in what he hoped looked like confidence. Today was the day he would finally break the insufferable human spirit. Marcus Kane had been disrupting his interspecies relations class for 3 cycles now, asking uncomfortable questions and making observations that left half the Galactic Council's finest students questioning their most basic assumptions about the universe. Today, class, we have a very special demonstration, Vex-9 announced, his 4 eyes gleaming with what could only be described as malicious glee. Behind him, 2 heavily armored Corellian guards wheeled in a reinforced containment unit. The metal box hummed ominously, frost coating its edges despite the classroom's warm atmosphere. The assembled students, a mixture of Xerathi pacifists, Thylorian intellectuals, and various other species from the Peaceful Alliance, immediately shifted in their seats. Nervous chittering filled the air like a symphony of anxiety. All except one. Marcus Kane, the lone human in advanced xenobiology studies, barely looked up from his datapad. He was currently reviewing what appeared to be cooking recipes. The audacity was breathtaking. As you all know, Vex-9 continued, savoring every word. The most dangerous predator species in known space is the Xerathi. They are apex hunters, capable of dissolving metal with their saliva, possessing razor-sharp claws that can slice through starship hulls, and harboring an insatiable hunger for, well, everything. A collective shudder ran through the classroom. The Xerathi student, Pip-7, actually fainted and had to be caught by her tentacled study partner. This was exactly the reaction Vex-9 had been hoping for. What many of you don't know, he said, pausing for dramatic effect while activating the containment unit's release mechanism, is that even their young are formidable killing machines. Observe. The box opened with a satisfying hiss of escaping coolant. Inside, curled up on what appeared to be a bed of shredded metal and bone fragments, was a creature roughly the size of a house cat. It had midnight black fur with silver stripes, 6 legs ending in retractable claws, and enough teeth to make a shark jealous. Its eyes, when they opened, glowed like molten gold. The Xerathi hatchling stretched, yawned, and looked around the classroom with the kind of casual interest one might show when deciding between breakfast cereals. Its gaze swept across the cowering students, lingered on Professor Vex-9 for a moment that felt uncomfortably like being evaluated as potential prey, and then settled on Marcus Kane. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiology circles for decades to come. The hatchling tilted its head, made a sound that could generously be described as a purr crossed with a chainsaw, and launched itself directly at the human. Every student in the class screamed. Professor Vex-9 dove behind his desk. The Corellian guards reached for their plasma rifles. And Marcus Kane. Marcus Kane calmly set down his datapad, caught the flying ball of death and claws mid-air, and started scratching behind its ears. The hatchling's purring intensified to the point where it was vibrating the windows. "Oh, you're just a baby, aren't you?" Marcus cooed, completely oblivious to the fact that he was cuddling what was essentially a living weapon. "Yes, you are. Yes, you are, you little apex predator." The classroom fell into stunned silence. Even the Xerathi hatchling seemed surprised by this turn of events, though it was clearly enjoying the attention. Its purring had now reached frequencies that were making the Thylorians clutch their overly large heads in discomfort. Professor Vex-9 slowly emerged from behind his desk, all 4 of his eyes wide with disbelief. That's impossible. Xerathi are solitary hunters. They don't form bonds. They don't purr at strangers. "Really?" Marcus asked, now holding the hatchling like a baby while it batted playfully at his fingers with claws that could theoretically slice through titanium. "Because this little guy seems pretty social to me. What's your name, buddy?" The hatchling responded with a series of clicks and chirps that somehow sounded like conversation. "I'll call you Rex," Marcus decided. "You look like a Rex." Rex, the Xerathi hatchling, appeared to approve of this designation and settled comfortably in Marcus's lap. where it began grooming itself with the casual confidence of a creature that had just found its new favorite human. The rest of the class stared in various states of shock, confusion, and existential crisis. The Xerathi student who had fainted earlier took one look at the scene and promptly fainted again. "This is highly irregular," Professor Vex 9 stammered, his carefully planned lesson derailing faster than a freight hauler with faulty gravity stabilizers. "Xerathi don't. They're not supposed to." "Maybe," Marcus suggested helpfully, still scratching Rex behind the ears while the creature continued its motorboat impression. "You don't actually know as much about Xerathi as you think you do." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Professor Vex 9's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sure sign of mounting irritation. He had brought the most dangerous predator hatchling in the galaxy to terrorize his students, particularly the annoyingly confident human, and instead he was witnessing what could only be described as an interspecies bonding session. "The Xerathi," he said through gritted. Well, whatever Corellian professors had instead of teeth, are documented as solitary, aggressive, and completely incompatible with other species. The Galactic Council's entire defense strategy is based on this fact. Marcus looked up from where he was now teaching Rex to play a simple game that involved the hatchling gently batting at his fingers. Maybe the Galactic Council's intelligence gathering needs some work. The suggestion was delivered with such casual politeness that it took several seconds for its full implications to sink in. When they did, the reaction was immediate and varied. The Thylorian students began rapidly calculating the potential ramifications of everything they thought they knew being wrong. The Xerathi delegation started hyperventilating in their characteristic whistling fashion, and Professor Vex 9 looked like he was having a small aneurysm. "Are you suggesting," he said slowly, "that the collective wisdom of the galaxy's greatest minds is somehow incorrect?" "I'm suggesting," Marcus replied, now dangling what appeared to be a piece of string for Rex to chase, "that maybe asking the Xerathi what they actually want might be more effective than assuming they're mindless killing machines." Rex pounced on the string with the enthusiasm of any young creature at play, though his version of playful pouncing involved briefly phasing through the classroom floor before reappearing with the string held triumphantly in his jaws. "Did it just," one of the Thylorian students whispered, "phase through matter?" "Yeah, they can do that apparently," Marcus said casually. "Pretty useful hunting adaptation, I imagine." Professor Vex 9 was now making small clicking sounds that his species typically reserved for moments of extreme distress. His perfectly organized worldview was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. "But the reports," he protested weakly. "The documented attacks, the destroyed colonies." "Were any of those colonies trying to communicate?" Marcus asked. "Or were they shooting first and asking questions never?" The question was rhetorical, but the silence that followed was deafening. Rex had finished dismantling the string and was now exploring Marcus's pockets with the focused intensity of a creature searching for treats. "I might have some snacks," Marcus murmured to his new friend. "Let's see. Protein bars, energy cells, emergency rations." He pulled out what looked like a standard military meal replacement. "This probably isn't ideal for your digestive system, but..." Rex snatched the protein bar from Marcus's hand and devoured it in approximately 2 seconds, wrapper and all. Then he looked up expectantly for more. "Okay, that's probably not good for you," Marcus laughed. "We'll need to figure out proper Xerathi nutrition." The casual way he said, "we'll need to figure out," implied a future relationship that extended beyond this classroom demonstration. Professor Vex 9 caught this implication and felt his remaining confidence evaporate entirely. "You can't just adopt a Xerathi hatchling," he spluttered. "Why not?" Marcus asked reasonably. "He seems to like me. I like him. And, honestly, he's probably safer with someone who won't try to shoot him on sight." Rex chose this moment to demonstrate his approval by climbing onto Marcus's shoulder and rubbing his face against the human's neck, purring loud enough to drown out the classroom's ventilation system. The other students were beginning to recover from their initial shock and were now watching the interspecies bonding session with fascination rather than terror. Slowly, hesitantly, one of the braver Thylorians raised a manipulator appendage. "Is it safe to approach?" she asked. "His name is Rex," Marcus corrected gently. "And I think he's friendly enough, but maybe let him come to you if he wants to." "Forced interactions never work well with predators." The Thylorian student, who had introduced herself earlier as Kayla Prime, nodded seriously and extended her hand cautiously. Rex regarded her with golden eyes for several long moments, then graciously allowed her to scratch under his chin. The purring intensified to seismic levels. "This is absolutely unprecedented," Professor Vex-9 muttered, frantically making notes on his datapad. Xerathi hatchlings showing social behavior, accepting physical contact from multiple species, demonstrating clear preference for peaceful interaction over aggressive response patterns. "Maybe," suggested Pip-7, who had finally regained consciousness and was watching from a safe distance. "They're just like any other young creatures. They want to play and explore and learn about the world." "Impossible," Vex-9 insisted, though his protest sounded increasingly hollow. "The research clearly states—" "The research," Marcus interrupted politely, "was conducted by species that considered the Xerathi enemies before they ever met them. That might have influenced their conclusions." Rex had now decided that Calaprime was acceptable and was allowing her to examine his paws with scientific fascination. His claws, which should have been deployed at the first sign of potential threat, remained completely retracted. "His paw pads are surprisingly soft," Calaprime observed, "and warm, almost like a thermal regulation system. Makes sense for a species that travels through different environmental conditions," Marcus agreed. "Probably helps with gripping different surface types, too." The casual conversation about Xerathi anatomy was apparently too much for Professor Vex-9's remaining composure. "This is supposed to be a demonstration of predatory aggression patterns," he announced desperately. "Not a xenobiology petting session." "Well," Marcus said thoughtfully, "it is demonstrating predatory behavior, isn't it?" Rex chose to approach the least threatening individual in the room, established a safe social connection, and secured access to resources. That's actually pretty sophisticated predatory strategy. Rex, as if understanding the compliment, chirped proudly and began showing off by briefly turning translucent. "Adaptive camouflage too," noted another student. "Remarkable." Professor Vex-9 slumped into his chair, defeated. His carefully planned lesson had backfired so spectacularly that it had essentially proven the opposite of everything he had intended to demonstrate. The dangerous predator was being social. The human was displaying impossible competence in interspecies relations. And his students were learning more about Xerathi behavior in 20 minutes than the Galactic Council had documented in 20 years. "Perhaps," suggested Calaprime diplomatically, "we should revise our understanding of predator species in general." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, "we should consider the possibility that the distinction between predator and prey species isn't as absolute as we've been taught." Rex yawned, displaying an impressive array of razor-sharp teeth, then curled up in Marcus's lap and began what appeared to be a nap. His purring settled into a gentle rumble that was actually quite soothing. The transformation from terrifying apex predator to sleepy kitten was so complete that several students were now openly questioning everything they had ever been taught about galactic biology. "If the Xerathi aren't actually aggressive," whispered one of the Zilani students, "then what about all the other species we've classified as dangerous?" "What about the war?" asked another. "What about the defense spending?" added a third. Professor Vex-9 watched his career in xenobiological education flash before his eyes as his students began deconstructing the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization, all because a human had scratched a predator behind the ears. "Class dismissed," he said weakly. But nobody moved. They were all too fascinated by the sight of Marcus Kane, the impossible human, providing a safe nap spot for what was supposed to be the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. Outside the classroom, word was already beginning to spread through the academic station. The human had tamed a Xerathi hatchling. The human had made it purr. The human was challenging everything they thought they knew about the universe. And somewhere in the depths of space, adult Xerathi intercepted the transmission and began preparing for a very different kind of first contact than anyone had expected. The emergency session of the Academic Council convened exactly 4 hours after the Xerathi incident, as it was already being called in hushed whispers throughout the station. Director Hal Omega, a particularly pompous Xilani with an unfortunate tendency toward bureaucratic panic, presided over the chaos with all the grace of a three-legged Thylorian attempting ballet. "This is a disaster of unprecedented proportions," Hal Omega announced, his translator struggling to convey the proper level of hysteria in his voice. "We have a human student who has somehow domesticated what is essentially a living weapon, and now half our student body is questioning the fundamental principles of galactic defense policy." Around the conference table, various department heads nodded in agreement, though their expressions suggested they weren't entirely sure what they were agreeing with. The whole situation had developed too quickly for proper committee analysis, which was clearly making everyone uncomfortable. "Where is the human now?" asked Dr. Zel 15, the head of practical xenobiology, and someone who prided herself on maintaining scientific objectivity, even in crisis situations. "Student Kane is currently in his dormitory," reported Security Chief Mox Beta, consulting his datapad with the grim efficiency of someone delivering terrible news. "The Xerathi hatchling is still with him. They appear to be studying together." The phrase "studying together" was delivered with the kind of bewildered inflection typically reserved for reporting that gravity had suddenly decided to work sideways. "Studying what?" Dr. Zel 15 asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Advanced engineering principles, apparently," Mox Beta replied. "Security cameras show the human explaining propulsion systems while the creature pays attention and occasionally offers what appear to be suggestions." Director Hal Omega's tentacles writhed in distress. "Suggestions? The apex predator is making suggestions about starship engineering?" "That's not the concerning part," Mox Beta continued grimly. "The concerning part is that preliminary analysis suggests the suggestions are actually quite good." The silence that followed this revelation was profound enough to qualify for its own gravitational field. Meanwhile, in Dormitory Block 7, Marcus Kane was having the most productive study session of his academic career. Rex had proven to be surprisingly insightful about engineering concepts, particularly those involving energy flow and structural optimization. His suggestions mostly involved demonstrating principles by briefly phasing through various objects, which provided excellent practical examples of matter-energy interaction. "So if we adjust the plasma conduit configuration like this," Marcus was saying, sketching modifications on his datapad while Rex watched intently, "we should be able to improve efficiency by at least 15%. Rex chirped approvingly and pointed with one claw at a section of the diagram. The gesture was unmistakably suggesting a further refinement. "Oh, that's brilliant," Marcus laughed. "If we route the secondary flow through that junction instead, we eliminate the bottleneck entirely." He made the adjustment and showed the result to his study partner. "You're definitely getting credit as co-author on this project." The idea of a Xerathi hatchling receiving academic credit for engineering contributions would have given the Academic Council collective heart failure, but fortunately for their cardiovascular health, they were currently occupied with a different crisis. "We've received a transmission," announced Communications Officer Pex 7. Bursting into the emergency meeting with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested either excellent comedic instincts or terrible luck. "Long-range sensors detect an incoming Xerathi vessel. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop several degrees. Xerathi ships were legendary for their rarity. their advanced technology, and their tendency to appear just before entire solar systems went mysteriously silent. Battle stations? Suggested someone hopefully. With what? Director Holomega replied helplessly. This is an academic station. Our most powerful weapon is the coffee machine in the faculty lounge, and that's only dangerous because Professor Click-9 never cleans it properly. We could try diplomatic contact, Dr. Xel-15 suggested, with the kind of optimism typically associated with people who had never actually studied Xerathi communication patterns. They don't respond to diplomatic overtures, Security Chief Mox Beta pointed out. They don't respond to anything. The last 3 attempts at communication resulted in entire diplomatic fleets simply disappearing. Maybe, came a familiar voice from the conference room doorway. You've been using the wrong translator. Marcus Kane stood in the entrance. Rex perched comfortably on his shoulder like the universe's most dangerous fashion accessory. The Xerathi hatchling surveyed the assembled academic leadership with golden eyes that somehow managed to convey both curiosity and mild amusement. Student Kane, Director Holomega managed weakly. You shouldn't be here. This is a restricted meeting. Rex disagrees, Marcus replied pleasantly. Apparently, Xerathi have very different concepts about restricted access. Something about hierarchical social structures being artificially limiting to effective problem-solving. The fact that he was apparently translating Xerathi social philosophy on the fly was almost as disturbing as the philosophy itself. The incoming vessel, Dr. Xel-15 said urgently, What do they want? Marcus tilted his head slightly, listening to Rex's soft chirping. The conversation that followed was unlike anything the Academic Council had ever witnessed. The human and the predator appeared to be engaging in genuine dialogue, complete with gestures, tonal variations, and what could only be described as interspecies body language. They're curious, Marcus finally translated. Apparently, Rex has been transmitting regular updates about his experiences here. The adult Xerathi are interested in meeting the species that can successfully interact with their young without triggering defensive responses. Updates? Security Chief Mox Beta repeated faintly. The creature has been transmitting. Well, yes, Marcus said, as if this should have been obvious. Xerathi are highly social. They maintain constant communication with their family groups. Rex has been telling them about his day, basically. Classes, new friends, interesting discoveries about galactic engineering principles. New friends? Director Holomega's voice had risen to a pitch that was causing several species-specific auditory discomfort. The other students have been visiting, Marcus explained. Kayla Prime brings him snacks. Pip 7 taught him some basic mathematics. And yesterday, Rex helped the engineering club solve a propulsion problem they'd been stuck on for weeks. The revelation that the Xerathi hatchling had been conducting what amounted to informal diplomacy with half the student body while simultaneously contributing to academic research was apparently too much for the Academic Council's collective processing capacity. Several members simply stared in shocked silence, while others began making rapid calculations about the implications for their respective departments. So the incoming ship, Dr. Xel-15 said carefully, is not here to destroy the station. More like a parental visit, Marcus confirmed. They want to meet Rex's new teacher and evaluate whether this environment is suitable for continued education. His teacher? Professor Vex-9, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally found his voice. I'm his teacher. This is my class. Rex turned to look at Vex-9 with an expression that could generously be described as politely skeptical. He chirped something that made Marcus chuckle. He says you're more of a negative example, Marcus translated diplomatically. Useful for learning what not to do in interspecies relations. The burn was delivered with such casual politeness that it took several seconds for its full impact to register. When it did, Professor Vex-9 made a small strangled sound and began reviewing his life choices. The point is, Marcus continued, the Xerathi adults are coming to talk, not to fight, but they're going to want to speak with whoever is actually responsible for Rex's positive educational experience. Which would be Director Holomega asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and wasn't particularly happy about it. Me, apparently, Marcus said with the kind of casual acceptance that suggested he found interspecies diplomacy only mildly more complicated than his usual Tuesday afternoon schedule. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation that accomplished absolutely nothing productive. The Academic Council held 3 additional emergency meetings, generated 17 different contingency plans, and sent approximately 47 panicked messages to various government agencies. None of these activities had any practical effect on the approaching situation, but they did provide a valuable outlet for institutional anxiety. Marcus, meanwhile, spent the time helping Rex prepare for the reunion by making sure he had properly documented his academic achievements and could articulate his positive experiences in terms his family would understand. It was, by any objective measure, the most thorough preparation for a parent-teacher conference in galactic history. When the Xerathi vessel finally arrived, it did so with a complete absence of dramatic flair that somehow made it even more unsettling. One moment the long-range sensors showed empty space, and the next moment a ship was simply there, as if it had always existed, and everyone had just forgotten to notice it until now. The ship itself defied easy description. It seemed to exist in a state of controlled impossibility, phasing in and out of visible reality while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Looking at it directly was like trying to focus on something that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. They're requesting permission to dock, Communications Officer PEX 7 reported with the kind of professional calm that suggested either admirable composure or complete psychological breakdown. Granted, Director Holomega said, because really, what else could he say? The docking procedure was completed with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. The Xerathi ship interfaced with the academic station's systems as if it had been designed specifically for this purpose, despite the fact that the 2 technologies should have been completely incompatible. The airlock opened, and 3 adult Xerathi entered the station. If Rex was impressive, his family members were absolutely magnificent. They stood approximately 7 feet tall, moving with liquid grace that suggested perfect control over both their physical forms and their immediate environment. Their fur was the deep black of space between stars, marked with silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living constellations. Most remarkably, they were completely non-threatening. Despite being armed with natural weapons that could theoretically dismantle the entire station, they radiated an aura of calm curiosity that made everyone feel simultaneously safer and more intellectually inadequate. The lead adult, who Rex immediately identified as his parent through a series of joyful chirps, approached Marcus with the kind of measured attention typically reserved for important diplomatic negotiations. What followed was a conversation conducted in a mixture of standard galactic, Xerathi vocal patterns, and what appeared to be some form of telepathic undertones. Marcus participated with the same casual competence he had shown throughout this entire impossible situation. They're impressed with Rex's progress, he translated for the assembled academic leadership. Apparently, he's learned more about interspecies cooperation in the past few days than most Xerathi young learn in a full cycle. They're wondering if similar educational opportunities might be available for other young Xerathi. The implications of this request were staggering. The Xerathi were essentially proposing a student exchange program with the species that had spent centuries preparing for war against them. That would require significant policy changes, Director Holomega managed. They understand. Marcus nodded. They're willing to start small, perhaps a few qualified students, carefully monitored, with appropriate safety protocols. Safety protocols for whom? Dr. Zell 15 asked. Marcus listened to another exchange with Rex's parent, then smiled. For everyone else, apparently. Xerathi young can be quite destructive when they're bored, and they get bored easily without sufficient intellectual stimulation. The adult Xerathi made what sounded like an agreeable rumble, which Rex translated with obvious pride in his species' academic reputation. They're also interested in collaborative research opportunities, Marcus continued. Xerathi technology could complement galactic science in some interesting ways, and they have some questions about human engineering approaches that they find intriguingly illogical. Illogically intriguing? Professor Vex 9 asked weakly. Intriguingly illogical, Marcus corrected. Apparently, human tendency to find unconventional solutions is quite fascinating to species with more structured thought patterns. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from academic curriculum to interspecies dietary requirements. By the end, what had started as a crisis had transformed into the foundation for what could only be described as a complete revolution in galactic relations. So, Director Holomega said finally, they're willing to establish formal diplomatic contact, participate in academic exchanges, and collaborate on research projects. As long as their young are treated with the same respect and educational opportunities as any other students, Marcus confirmed. And as long as Rex can finish his semester here. He's apparently very excited about his advanced propulsion theory course. Rex chirped agreement and produced what appeared to be a perfectly completed assignment that he had somehow finished during the diplomatic negotiations. The academic council exchanged glances that conveyed a mixture of exhaustion, bewilderment, and the dawning realization that they were about to become the most important educational institution in galactic history. I suppose, Director Holomega said slowly, we should start planning for expanded enrollment. 3 months later, the academic station hosted its first interspecies cooperation symposium. The event was attended by representatives from 47 different species, including a delegation of 12 young Xerathi, who had seamlessly integrated into the student body. Marcus Kane was awarded the Galactic Medal for Diplomatic Innovation, though he spent most of the ceremony helping Rex and his classmates with a collaborative engineering project that had somehow resulted in improvements to the station's power efficiency systems. Professor Vex 9 had taken early retirement and was last seen opening a small cafe on a quiet agricultural world, where the most dangerous predator was an occasionally grumpy farm animal that made excellent cheese. And Rex, now a permanent student and unofficial ambassador for his species, continued to purr whenever anyone scratched behind his ears, proving once and for all that some things transcend species boundaries, diplomatic protocols, and the fundamental assumptions about the nature of the universe. The galaxy, it turned out, was a much friendlier place when everyone stopped assuming the worst about each other and started offering snacks instead.